Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. We're still in the middle of this awful, horrible war, and obviously our learning is dedicated to the release of the hostages, for a full shlema for all of the injured soldiers, including among them Elisha Yehuda ben Rut, Rav Meidan's son, and obviously for a complete victory for our forces and for the forces of good and morality in the world. Okay, I'd like to touch on three topics today. The first is a really interesting one. It's a famous machlokas between the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra, and I think underlying that machlokas is the role of wealth in the world and the role of wealth in God's rewarding people. We'll see that. Also a discussion of the brachot, right? Did Yitzchak really want to give the bracha of Avraham to Esau? And in between, an interesting topic, which is, did the Avos keep the Torah? Did they keep the Torah only in Israel? Did they keep the Torah only at a particular time? Or did they not? Okay, those are the three topics. I assume it will be interesting. And let's start. So, Parak Chaf Hey, Pasuk Lamed Zayin, says as, Pasuk Lamed Dalet says as follows: V'Yaakov natan le'Esav lechem u'nizid adashim, vayochal vayesht, vayakam vayelach, vayivez Esav et habechora. Right? Esau came from the field, v'hu ayef, and he was hungry and he was tired, and he asked Yaakov for some of the porridge, and Yaakov gave it to him. And the end of the pasuk is vayivez Esav et habechora, that he disrespected the bechora. And the question is why? So Rashi says, vayivez Esav et habechora, quoted by the Ramban, al agfar amar hatam sheba'avura ne'ot lamechira mipnei she'haya holech lamut b'tzudo hachayot v'karov hu she'amut b'chaya aviv ve'ein lebechora shum ma'ala rak acharei ha'av. So the first pshat, says Rashi, look, Esau was a hunter, and apparently that's a very, very dangerous profession. And he thought it was likely he was going to die before Yitzchak died, in which case, who needs to be the Bechor? Who needs to be Yoresh more than the other siblings? It's not going to happen for him. Umat to'ilo ha-Bechora, why would it help him? Okay? Right, and then he says, Ki achar she'achal v'shata chazar hasadeh el tzeido, v'zo sibat bizui ha-Bechora. Right, he's going out to the field anyway, where he's going to maybe get hurt. Okay, so he says, if you're a ksil, Rashi makes fun of Esau a little bit. If you're an idiot, if you're a fool, so you have a very short time frame, and you think, what do I want to wait till later on? Why do I want to be the Bechor to inherit my father? It's never going to happen anyway. Okay, that's Rashi. Now the Ibn Ezra. And let's give him a chance before we dismiss it. Rabbi Avraham mishtabesh bekan ma'od. The Ramban introduces it, doesn't really give us a chance. He says Rabbeinu Avraham really messed up here. He doesn't understand what's going on. Shalmar ki bizaha bechora ba'avur shera'a she'ein mamon la'aviv. The Ibn Ezra has a really interesting pshat. He thinks Esau thought to himself, my father's not rich, he has no money. And therefore, what's the point of inheriting him? V'rabim yitmahu. And now probably you are wondering, Ki azav lo Avraham mamon rav. Avraham left a lot of money to Yitzchak. Uki'ilu lo rubi meim ashir gadol binu rav. Yitzchak was the richest guy in the world. So says the Ibn Ezra, okay, he was the richest guy in the world when he was young. It's as if the world never saw somebody who was rich. Ba lidei oni bizikunav. And later on, he goes bankrupt. Right? He built all these buildings. He didn't know when to stop. Then he went bankrupt. It could happen. V'ha'ed shayad Yitzchak ohevet Esav ba'avur tzeidah. What's the proof? Says the Ibn Ezra, if Yitzchak was so rich, why would he need Esau to go bring him matamim kasher ahev? He'll bring him some meat. He could have meat whenever he wants. V'ilu haya lechem rav beveit aviv v'hu nichbad be'einav. But if Yitzchak had unlimited money and unlimited food, lo machart b'chorato ba'avur nazid. Similarly, when Esau comes back from the field and he sells his bechora to get some food from Yaakov, says the Ramban, if there was unlimited food in the house of Yitzchak, Esau wouldn't have done it. It must be that Yitzchak was not a rich man. V'im haya aviv b'chol yom ochel matamim matam yomar elav haviu litzayid V'lama lo hayu li Yaakov bigadim chamudot. In addition to the food, right, only Esau had bigadim chamudot, not Yaakov. Why did Yaakov not have bigadim chamudot? More than that, says the Ibn Ezra, v'lo nitana lo imo kesef v'zahav laderech. When he ran off to the house of Lavan, says the Ibn Ezra, why didn't his mother give him a lot of money? Why didn't she give him malim, meinik, all the things that, let's say, Eliezer took with him? Shamar v'natan li lechem lacholu beged lobosh. He didn't have enough. Lama lo shalcha lo hon v'yohevet oto ki hutzrach lishmor hatzon. Right? Why does Yaakov Avinu have to become a shepherd for Lavan? Why didn't he come with a lot of money? His mother loved him. She could have given him all the money in the world. V'hapasuk shamar vayigdal ha'ish. So what does it mean when the pasuk says vayigdal ha'ish? Yitzchak just entered into a whole treaty with Avimelech because he was so big, he was so rich. No, says the Ibn Ezra, kodem ziknato. All that happened before he got old. Okay, so it's a strange pshat, but the more you think about it, the more compelling it kind of is. All these things wouldn't have happened if Yitzchak was rich. He wouldn't have needed Esau to hunt for him. He wouldn't have given Yaakov nothing when he went off to the house of Lavan. Esau wouldn't have sold the Bechorah for some porridge. And he says, V'ivrei lev yachshavu, now we get to the real point. Blinded people, v'ivrei lev, people who don't have sensitivity, ki ha'osher ma'ala gedola latzadikim. Says the Ibn Ezra, a lot of people think that being rich is a great madrega, and God rewards tzadikim with wealth. V'hinei Eliyahu yochiach. Okay, and he says, no, Eliyahu will prove otherwise. Eliyahu was not rich. As an aside, and I'm not saying this is why the Ibn Ezra says so, the Ibn Ezra is exceptionally poor. Right? The story goes that the Ibn Ezra said once that if I started making tachrichim, people would stop dying. Okay, meaning he had a lot of business ideas, none of them worked out. The Ibn Ezra was sensitive to this point, and it bothers him that we think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewards people with wealth. Okay, v'od yishalu lama chaser Hashem mamon liYitzchak. Says Ibn Ezra. Now you also might ask, why would God have not given wealth to Yitzchak? Yitzchak was a tzaddik. Ulai yodianu lama chaser ma'or einav. Says the Ibn Ezra. Why don't you then ask, why did God make Yitzchak blind? HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a plan. And the Ibn Ezra is against this idea that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you, he's going to make you rich. Okay? Says the Ramban now. Va'ani tema. Mi iver einei sichlo bazeh. The Ramban kind of, hits back at the Ibn Ezra. The Ramban had a very, very complicated relationship with the Ibn Ezra, right? In his introduction to the Torah, the Ramban says, I love Rashi. Rashi comes first. And I'm going to have tochacha giluya va'ahava misuteret to Rabbi Avraham. I'm going to have open condemnation, but I'll secretly have love for Rabbi Avraham. So, okay, many people explain, and I think it's a compelling explanation, that when he doesn't trash the Ibn Ezra, it's because he agrees with him. But when he does trash him, it's because he's angry and he's upset. And here he is. He says, on a play on words, he says, Mi iver einei sichlo bazeh. The Ibn Ezra said, who would have made Yitzchak blind? The Ramban says, who made the Ibn Ezra blind as to Yitzchak? Kine Avraham hiniach lo hon rav. Right? Avraham left him much wealth. That's indisputable. V'avad ha'osher hahu miyad kodem ha'oni hazeh. You have to say, okay, he lost all the money before the story. Umipnei zeh bizat ha'bechora. Ki hadavar hazeh haya bin urehem kodem hayot le'esav nashim kasher yisaper hakatuv. Right? When Esau sold the Bechor to Yaakov, he was young. He had no wives yet. So you have to say that Yitzchak was rich, lost all the money completely before Esau sold the Bechorah. Va'acharei kein chazar v'ha'ashir be'eretz plishtim. Then we got rich again. Ad ki gadal ma'od. Vayikaneu bo sarei plishtim. Va'acharei kein chazar le'onyo v'hitavel l'tseid b'no v'hamatamim. And then he became poor again, and he desired for Esau to bring him matamim, to bring him, deer and goats and whatever. Ve'ein elu rak divrei schok. Says the Ramban, no, it's a joke. It can't be, it isn't. Va'od. Ki ha'katuv amar v'hi acharei mot Avraham v'yivorach Elokim et Yitzchak b'no. What does it mean that God blessed him? Says the Ramban. V'habracha tosefet ba'osher u'b'nechasim v'chavod. He blessed him with material wealth. Vayeh birkato shavad hon aviv v'ha'ani. Where would the bracha be if he lost all of his father's wealth and he became poor? V'acharei kain, v'yeh imcha v'avorechecha ha'ashir v'ha'ani acharei kain. Then he got rich and became poor again. V'im yesh tzadikim shemagia aleihem k'maaseh ha'reshaim b'inyan ha'osher. Ein zeh ba'otam shenitbaruchu mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki birkat Hashem hi ta'ashir v'lo yosiv etzev imah. Says the Ramban, the Ibn Ezra could be right. It could be that there are tzaddikim who are not rich, who don't have material wealth. He said, but not the avos, not when God blesses them publicly. It can't be. Aval hayu ha'avot kulam kimalachim umalchei goyim ba'im lifnehem v'kartim imahem brit. The avot, says the Ramban, they were like princes, and Gentiles came to bow before them and to sort of work things out. V'kasu v'ishbush lachiv. Okay, so im haya Yitzchak ra hamazal ma'abei nichse aviv eicha amru ra'o ra'inu ki hara Hashem imach, etc., etc. Can't be. So what is it? He says, aval bizui ha'bechara le'esav la'achzariyut libo. Says the Ramban, when Esau was mevazeh the bechora, it's because Esau was an angry, arrogant, short-sighted person, and that's why he did it. V'yitachein, in addition, he says, Ki pi hashnayim b'bechora b'mishpetei HaTorah lo haya kein lefanim. It could be that the fact that the bechor takes pi shnayim wasn't a halacha then, and Esau was unaware of it, and so he was happy to sell the bechora, right? Maybe the bechor was just an honorary position back then, so Esau sold it. Okay, and so without reading too much, well, I already read too much, but without going into it too much, I feel like underneath it all is a machlokes about the role of wealth. And the Ramban says, no, when God blesses a person publicly, like Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, he's rich, because that's what the world sees as being accomplished. For the Ibn Ezra, the world can see beyond that. He doesn't have to be rich. He can be blessed by God without being rich, because wealth is not a sign of being blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, there's much more to be said about that, but that's at least a very, very interesting machlokes between the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra. Okay, let's go on to Perek Chaf Vav Pasuk Hey, where the Torah is telling us why God loves Yitzchak, and he gets a bracha, but he gets a bracha because of Avraham. Ekev asher shama Avraham b'koli, vayishmor mishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'torotai. Okay, so here the Ramban quotes the pasuk that Avraham kept mishmarti, mitzvotai, chukotai, v'torotai, and Rashi explains all of those things are the Torah. The Torah shebechsav, the Torah shebal peh, their harchakos, their drabbanans. Avraham Avinu kept kol haTorah kula. That's Rashi's position. Okay. V'im kain, says the Ramban, yihiyeh kol ze banui al dat shaya Avraham mikayem u'mishamer et haTorah ad shelo nitna. Okay, the Ramban says, according to Rashi, obviously Avram kept the Torah before it was given. Now here comes the question. V'im kain yiyeh kol ze banui al dat shaya. Sorry, they're ready. Okay, that's the conclusion from Rashi. Now, says the Ramban, v'yesh lish'ol im kain eich hekim Yaakov matzeva. If this is the case, how did Yaakov make a matzeva? That's an Isser Torah. More than that, v'nasa shtei achayot. He married two sisters. That's an Isser Torah. Ukedat rabotenu arba'a. And according to Chazal, Zilpah and Bilhah were also sisters of Rachel and Leah. He married four sisters. That's an Isser Torah. Va'amram, Moshe's father, nasa dodato. He married his aunt. That's an Isser Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu hekim shtei mesrei matzeva. Moshe Rabbeinu established 12 matzevot. That's an Isser Torah. Ve'ach afshar sheyu noagim heter b'Torah b'ma she'asar Avraham Avinu al atzmo. V'kava lo Hashem sachar al hadavar. V'hu yitzavet banav ve'et b'neito acharav l'lechet b'drachav. Right? How could it be that God says to Yitzchak, I'm rewarding you, Eikev asher shama Avraham b'koli, vayishmor mishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'torotai, and then he doesn't do it? How could it be that Avraham's children don't keep the Torah when God says that Avraham's children will keep the Torah? Okay? That's a very, very strong question. Answers the Ramban. I'm skipping a little bit. V'hanireh elai midat rabotenu. Shelamad Avraham Avinu HaTorah kula b'ruach HaKodesh. So first of all, says the Ramban, yes. Chazal think that Avraham Avinu learned the Torah b'ruach HaKodesh. He intuited HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will. V'asak ba uv'ta'amei mitzvoteha v'sodoteha. And he learned Torah, and he dealt in the secrets of Torah. V'shamar ota kula kimi she'eino mitzuveh v'oseh. And he kept the Torah as an eino mitzuveh v'oseh, right? He wasn't commanded to keep Shabbos. He did it because he wanted to. And here's the point, says the Ramban. Ushmirato ota haya be'eretz bilvad. But he only kept the Torah in Eretz Yisrael. V'Yaakov b'chutz la'aretz bilvad nasa shtei achayot. Yaakov married two sisters, but in chutz la'aretz. V'chein Amram, he married his aunt, but in Mitzrayim. Ki ha-mitzvot mishpat elokei ha'aretz heim. A key line. Says the Ramban, the Torah belongs to Elokei ha'aretz. Elokei ha'aretz doesn't mean the God of the whole world. Elokei ha'aretz means the God of this world, the God of Eretz Yisrael. It's very reminiscent of the Medrash that says, this is Sifrei, that says that when God is gola you to chutz la'aretz hayu mitzuyanim sham, you should keep the mitzvos there so that you'll know how to do the mitzvos when you come back to Eretz Yisrael. But otherwise, you'd be patur from mitzvos in chutz la'aretz. Okay, but the question is, why would that be? And here it sort of gets into, and I'm speculating a little bit, but it gets into a deep idea of the Ramban, that God ceded control over the rest of the world. Not control, he obviously has ultimate control, but he gave every other place in the world a malach, or an astrological sign, that sort of has direct control over them, the control over which God can overrule them if he wants. But Eretz Yisrael he kept to himself. Eretz Yisrael is the land that God loves, and the people that God loves live in the land that God loves. And that works both litov and lera, right? God cares about Jews in Eretz Yisrael more than he cares about Jews in Chutz La'aretz. I'm saying it as a generalization, not obviously, there could be exceptions. But that's what the Ramban believes. We saw last week, or the week before, God only destroyed Sodom and Amorah because it was in Israel. If it had been in Ohio, God could have allowed or stomached, the immorality of Sodom and Amorah to exist. But in Eretz Yisrael, the land itself won't allow it. The land will ki'ilu rebel. Vataki ha'aretz etchem. The land will kick us out because the land is a player, and it's a special place, and it's a special land, and therefore the idea that the Avot kept the Torah only in Eretz Yisrael makes sense to the Ramban. Because only in Eretz Yisrael does it make sense to do things and feel close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you're not in the chosen land, it doesn't make sense to keep Shabbos when Shabbos hasn't been commanded to us yet. Okay, now the Ramban acknowledges a weakness in his argument. Afal pi shehizhiranu b'chovat haguf b'chol makom. Right? We normally break up mitzvos into chovas haguf and chovas hakarka. Right? So it's clear Shemitah doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz, and Trumas and Maisos don't apply, and Maisos Sheni doesn't apply, etc., etc. But we never thought to ourselves Tefillin doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz. But the Ramban says yes, even though Tefillin is a chovas haguf, even though matzah is a chovas haguf, even though shofar is a chovas haguf, those mitzvos which Avraham Avinu adopted upon himself as an eino mitzvah va'oseh, doesn't make any sense to do them in Chutz La'aretz, and so he didn't do them in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, he has some other examples. That Yosef kept Shabbos in Mitzrayim, but he says Shabbos is an exception to the mitzvos because Shabbos is Zeicha L'Maaseh Bereishis, and Yosef wanted his sons to be religious, and they were living in an irreligious land, so he focused on that. Then the Ramban has a simple pshat, which it's hard to know if that's what he really thinks, but he presents it. V'al derech hapshat tomar, shehei mishmarti emunata elokut. Right? The whole drasha of mishmarti, mitzvotai, torotai, chukotai, which Rashi dashes is all different types of observance of the Torah, the Ramban says, no, simple pshat is the belief in God. That's shehemin b'shem hamiyuchad. V'shamar mishmeret zo bilibo. And he kept the belief of God, in God, and he gave it to his children. V'chalak ba al ovdei avodah zara, v'kara b'shem Hashem la'ashiv rabim la'avodato. And he made a big deal out of it. And if you're an oved avodah zara, Avram attacked you because he thought it was wrong. And he brought a lot of people to Judaism because of this. Mitzvotai, what does it mean? Kechol asher tzivo belech lecha me'artzecha. That has to do with moving to Israel. Va'olat b'no, that has to do with the Akedah. Ugrishat ha'ama ve'et b'non, sending out Hagar and Yishmael. Chukotai, lalechet b'darkei Hashem liyot chanun v'rachum va'oset tzedakah mishpat litzavot et banav. Right, no, mitzvotai means lihidamot b'darkei Hashem. To have the character traits of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be a good person. V'torotai, ha'milah ba'atzmo u'banav va'avadav u'mitzvot b'nei Noach kulan she'ein Torah lahen. And Torotai means bris milah and zayin mitzvos b'nei Noach. So says the Ramban, I have a fancy answer to my question of how it could be that Yaakov married two sisters, and that's because it's in Chutz La'aretz, and the Ramban explains why Chutz La'aretz is less important than Eretz Yisrael. But at the end, the Ramban says, but the simple pshat is, the pasuk didn't mean that. The pasuk meant belief in God. The pasuk meant, being like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, having refined character traits. The pasuk meant listening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to move to Israel, listening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to sacrifice his son, etc., etc. And you don't have to ask a question of why Yaakov Avinu didn't keep Taryag Mitzvos. Yaakov Avinu didn't know Taryag Mitzvos. Avraham Avinu didn't know Taryag Mitzvos. He just knew the values of the Torah. Okay? That's not as broadly quoted as the other part of the Ramban, but it's probably pshat. Okay, last topic. We'll try to do this quickly. The brachos. Yitzchak wants to bless Esau. Okay, obviously, the major question is why Yitzchak wanted to bless Esau, and the specific question is, what bracha did Yitzchak want to give Esau? So, Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Daled, the Torah says, Va'aseli matamim kasher ahavti v'avi oli v'orchela, ba'avur tivorechecha nafshi b'ter mamut. So what's the bracha? Ba'avur tivorechecha nafshi b'ter mamut. What bracha did Yitzchak want to give to Esau? Says the Ramban, no pulling punches. V'haya b'da'ato livarech oto sheyizkehu b'birkat Avraham linchol et haaretz. Says the Ramban, no. Yitzchak wanted to give Esau the real bracha. He wanted to give him Eretz Yisrael. There are a lot of people who want to claim within the Ramban and other places that it's not so clear. At least here it's very clear, right? The idea that Yitzchak didn't plan to give Esau the Birkat Avraham, he planned to give him other brachot, it doesn't seem that way in the Ramban. He planned to give him the good bracha. V'liyotu ba'al habrit le'lokim kihu ha'bechor. The bechor gets the bracha. And therefore Esau was supposed to get the bracha. Now, it's not just that Rivka did this incredibly courageous thing by manipulating events to get Yaakov the bracha, but how did Rivka know? So he says, V'nira shelo higida lo Rivka me'olam ha'nevua asher amar lo Hashem v'rav ya'avod sa'ir. Right, if you remember at the beginning of the parsha, V'hinei tomim bevitna, and she's in great pain, Vayech lidrosh Hashem, Vayom Hashem la, right, Shnei goyim bevitnech, Ushnei le'umim mime'ach yiparedu, ula'om mila'om yamatz, v'rav ya'avod sa'ir. So says the Ramban, Rivka knew v'rav ya'avod sa'ir, therefore she wanted Yaakov to get the brachos. But v'nira shelo higida lo Rivka me'olam ha'nevuah asher amar Hashem la. Rivka never told that nevuah to her husband, to Yitzchak. It's fascinating. Ki eichaya Yitzchak over al pi Hashem v'hi lo titzlach, says the Ramban. It can't be that Rivka said, I had a nevuah, either directly or through Shem ben Noach. It was told to me, v'rav ya'avod sa'ir, and Yitzchak would say, I reject that nevuah. Of course he would accept the nevuah. V'hinei mitchila lo higida, so why didn't she tell her husband? So he says, v'hinei mitchila lo higida lo derech musar u'tzniut. Originally, she didn't tell Yitzchak about the nevuah out of modesty, meaning she didn't ask Yitzchak for permission to go lidrosh et Hashem. Presumably he didn't know about it at all. Ki vatech lidrosh et Hashem shalcha below reshut Yitzchak. Right? She didn't ask for permission, so she didn't want to tell Yitzchak. Or O shamra Ein anochi tzricha lahagid nevuah lenavi ki hu gadol min hamagidli. Right? Or she thought to herself, if I know the nevuah, of course Yitzchak knows the nevuah. There's no way I know something that he doesn't know. And if Shem ben Noach knows the nevuah, Yitzchak knows the nevuah. Okay, for now, she hears Yitzchak tell Esau, I want to give you the bracha. Her plan didn't work. Apparently Yitzchak doesn't know the nevuah, and she never told him the nevuah. So says the Ramban, so tell him now. So he said no. Va'ata lo ratzta le'mar lo kach hugad li me'et Hashem tered le'dati. She doesn't want to say to him now, ooh, here's what God told me before I gave birth. Ki amra ba'ahavato oto, because she thought to herself, because Yitzchak really loves Esau, lo yivarech Yaakov v'yaniach hakol b'dei shamayim. Right, so he's going to say, well, I wanted to bless Esau. You tell me that I have to bless Yaakov. You know what? I'm not going to bless anybody. V'hi yada'a ki b'sibat ze yitbarech Yaakov mipiv b'lev shalem v'nefesh chafetza. But she wanted Yaakov to receive the bracha from Yitzchak with a full heart. Ohem sibot meid, okay, that's one possibility. Ohem sibot meid Hashem kidei shidvarech Yaakov gam asu Esau bebirkat hacherev v'lo levado nitkenu alilot. Right? Or she may have thought, this is how it's supposed to be. I don't know, I'm not privy to all of God's plans, but I trust that this is the way it's supposed to be, so she did it. So it's really quite an incredible thing that Rivka did. Right? You know, in retrospect, of course Rivka did it. But in the moment, it's really an incredible thing. She went against her husband's wishes. She went against her husband, who's Yitzchak Avinu. She went against his wishes. The Ramban makes it clear. Yitzchak wanted to bless Esau with the entire ball of wax, the whole bracha, Eretz Yisrael and everything attached to it. He wanted to give Esau Birkat Avraham. Okay? Because of that, Rivka, who knew the truth, who either assumed that Yitzchak also knew the truth or was afraid to tell him now, because then no one would get the brachos, Rivka took really the incredibly courageous step of telling Yaakov, you have to lie to your father. And okay, there's all these explanations, all these reasons, but Lemaisa, that's what she told him. And it wasn't just a technicality, right? Says the Ramban, Yitzchak loved Esau. And if we had more time, we could talk about how that could be and why it should be and how Yitzchak could have made such a terrible mistake and how you're supposed to raise your children and all these smart things that we could say, you know, after the fact. But in the moment, Rivka saw what needed to be done and did it. And the Ramban, I think, is praising Rivka here by giving you the facts, that Rivka never told Yitzchak because she respected him too much. In the moment, she overcame that and she did what had to be done for the future of Klal Yisrael. Okay, so we saw three basic Rambans today. Two were really, really important. Well, all three were important. There's many, many more Rambans on the brachot, and maybe it's not as simple as I presented it. But we saw Vayiv as a Savata B'chora. Was Yaakov rich or not? Machlokes Ibn Ezra and the Ramban. That's one big, big discussion. Two, Vayishmor Mishmarti. Did the Avot keep Kol HaTorah Kula? Right? Rashi thinks they did. The Ramban explains if they did, how it could be that Yaakov married two sisters because they didn't keep the Torah in Chutz La'aretz because of the major difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. And finally, the Ramban saying, but Lemaisa, I don't really think that's the issue. I think the words mean that he kept the values of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he kept the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded him, not that he kept Taryag mitzvos. And finally, the one Ramban out of many on the whole dramatic story of the brachot, where the Ramban says, no, Yitzchak meant to bless Esau with all the brachot, and Rivka was the heroine of the story who went against her husband's wishes because she knew the nevuah of Rav Yavod Tza'ir, and therefore she did what she did, and Yaakov, and by extension us, we received the full bracha with the full heart. That's it for today. See you next week. Yashikach and Shabbat Shalom.